I'm Courtney Boyce.
I'm Derek Olthius, and you're listening to Drop Jaw Podcast.
Boom!
What cracks me up is when I go out in the woods and a guy's got to hold on to a tree or sit across a log because he can't squat. Dude, the human body was meant to squat and crap. I mean, that's like our major function.
I wish I could sit down and have a conversation with the trout and go, "So, Mr. Trout, why do you like those worms so much?"
I mean, those big fish, like you said, they got big for a reason, and more often than not, you walk away with your tail tucked between your legs.
Oh, yeah.
And you just got to salute him.
So you're going for it, and you're ready to do your final cast, and you put all this energy into that forward cast. You let it go, you release the line from your haul, and all of a sudden you hear this, oh, and you know exactly what just happened, and it is no fun.
Stick 'em solid.
Welcome to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast, your source for fly fishing talk, tips, and stories. In this episode, we talk about how to cast large, meaty flies. Jason explains the Belgian cast, aka the elliptical cast, the tension cast, the oval cast, or the circular cast. That's a lot of names, but it's very effective, and we discuss why. We also discuss line, leader, and tippet, and how they are key to casting big flies. If you enjoy this podcast, leave us a review. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or our YouTube channel. I am Chad Nelson, along with my co-host, Jason Arvey. Here is today's podcast. All right, focus fishing. Think Barry. Casting a juvenile trout. Casting out. Feel that tug. Ooh.
Set.
Hook up.
Reel in. Smile. Glory shot. Release. Repeat.
Yes. Brother, you are one handsome man.
I really appreciate that. My kids tell me I'm fat constantly, so it's good to hear that once in a while, you know.
So I'm driving Cassidy to school this morning, and I'm playing Mr. Big and some Scorpion music. And, man, she's jamming out, and then she looks at me, and she's like, "Man, I like this old music."
Yes, Cassidy.
I'm like, I didn't think I'm old, and I didn't think that music's that old, but
I like this old music.
And she says, "Old music's good."
That's the funniest, brother.
Oh, man.
Oh, that's awesome. Love that.
Well, speaking of old, man, we like to hook up old fish, which usually means they're big fish.
Oh, yeah.
Jason, today we're going to talk about casting, particularly casting big flies. We have had several questions come in, guys inquiring about casting flies and streamers, so let's talk a little bit about that today. When we tie on our big drop jaw fly streamers, let's talk about casting those, getting them out, and not nailing yourself in the back of the head.
Which I've done, which a lot of people have done. Yeah. There's got to be some techniques that you can do to try and limit the amount of bumps that you come home with.
Man, I came home one day and had a big bruise on my back.
Oh.
Nailed myself square in between the shoulder blades, but I can count 4 times that I've nailed myself either in the back of the head or my back. And another time, luckily, I had my pack on. But that sucks. It doesn't feel good. And so there's a few different casting techniques you can use to help avoid that.
Yeah. And there's nothing quite like that sound. When you're up on a cliff or a rock, the wind is blowing, and you know you've got to get your fly out 50, 60 feet because there's a fish in that area that you just saw. So you're going for it, and you're ready to do your final cast, and you put all this energy into that forward cast. You let it go. You release the line from your hull, and all of a sudden you hear this. Oh, and you know exactly what just happened, and it is no fun.
Yes.
Who's been there before? Come on, guys.
Well, that time I was talking about where I nailed myself in the back, you were 100 yards upstream from me, and you turned and looked because you heard that smack.
Oh yeah, that was a hard one.
Yeah. And then I heard an evil laugh from you too, I think.
Well, after I knew it, you were okay. You were slightly impaled, but
Well, the wind really does complicate it, and we can get into that too, but let's first talk about the casting technique. Explain to us, and I think some call it the Belgian cast, some call it the elliptical or the oval cast, but talk about that a little bit, explain how it works and why it's effective.
Yeah, the other name for it's the constant tension cast, and I think about that sometimes when I'm casting into the wind and it's kind of a difficult situation. I'm thinking about putting constant tension on that fly, and so sometimes in just your basic overhand cast, you're going to go forward, stop, pause, let the line unroll, and then begin your back cast, stop, pause. But in the oval, the constant tension cast, so you're almost on your back cast, you bring your rod on one plane and then slightly raise it before you make your forward cast, and so you come forward at a slightly higher plane and you're making this oval, and you don't really stop. Your rod's always in motion. So like if you have a line and you had a weight at the end of the line and you were swinging it around, that object at the very end is just going to stay in motion. And that's the idea of this cast, because these heavier flies that are weighted, if you make a cast and you stop, all that energy that's in the weight of the fly goes straight down, and it just becomes a chore to do. So what a lot of times what we'll do is the head on our fly line, and this is part of the component of this cast, is about 30 feet. And so trying to get that head out of the rod tip, be swinging your fly in that constant tension cast, the Belgian cast, the oval cast, elliptical cast, whatever. And as it approaches, that head approaches the tip top of your rod, that's when maybe you let just a little bit line slip, and then as soon as that's out, then you go forward with your cast is the safest way to do it.
Yeah, so the challenge using normal cast is the change of direction, because these big flies are weighted. At least ours are. They weigh a bunch, and so if you go straight back and then try to bring that straight forward, that's a lot of mass to change direction. The timing would have to be perfect to cast like that.
It is. So yeah, if you are not going to use the Belgian cast, and sometimes we don't, that's where your timing has to be just spot on, because as soon as the line unrolls and your fly hits the end of the cast, you have to, even just a little bit prior to the fly unrolling or coming to the change of its direction, you go forward. And the timing, if you just keep it crystal clear, the timing just has to be nanosecond or close to nanosecond, you'll be okay.
Well, and excuse me, I've screwed it up plenty. I mean, I've started to bring it forward too soon, create a lot of slack in the line. I've waited too long, and you can feel that jerk at the end when the fly gets to the end before I start to bring it forward, and that messes it up too. So,
or like you're saying, when you wait too long and you bring it forward, but it's already made contact with a weed or the ground or the rocks behind you.
Yes.
And so you just have to keep it the timing really tight.
Yeah, so the Belgian cast, like you described, the going back, it's either a side cast or at most maybe a 45-degree angle. but it's out to the side, and you bring it around in a loop and coming forward, you've got that constant tension. Then you don't have to worry about any of the problems we were just talking about.
Yeah, it really helps out and makes casting these flies, or really any weighted fly, much easier. And Chad, one of the problems I've had conversations with people about is when they get to the reservoir or the lake and they're ready, they're set up to cast, and they start casting these heavy flies, these problems that we've talked about come up. And how do you get past these problems? And one of the things that they might need to do, even though they're doing the Belgian cast or the oval cast, and they've got the technique down really well, but their equipment cannot handle the weight of the fly. So we need to talk about, making an adjustment there.
For sure. When I was learning or trying to learn this cast, I did a YouTube search, and there was only 1 or 2 videos on YouTube that show how to do the Belgian cast. So I think we'll film one here shortly and put it out there too, just to get more content on casting out there. But the ones that I could find, Jason, were saltwater fishermen. Mm-hmm. Guys out in the flats fishing for bonefish and tarpon and whatnot. And I think they use that a lot out there. It's effective because often it's windy. Fishing those flats is windy conditions. And so using this Belgian cast is effective in the wind. Yeah,
it is. And it's something that you would want to practice and have a good handle on, because it's a tool in your arsenal for when you've got wind coming off of your casting arm. A lot of times I've seen people who aren't that strong with their casting will turn their back to the water. The wind is coming from this direction, and they're just not very good at off-shoulder casting yet. So one thing that you can do is turn your back to the water and just make your regular cast. And as you make your back cast, you would actually be pointed towards the water. Then you would let it go. This is also pretty handy if you film yourself casting in a computer. You can see when I normally cast, my elbow will come out to the right and my rod tip will go over my left shoulder. And if you can see what happens, if I just cast normally, and I can compensate for this, but if I cast like that, a lot of times it will throw the fly back this way, and I come forward, and it's going to come in contact with my head unless my timing is good. So you can all go stand in the mirror or get in a computer and see, kind of just do your normal casting stroke and see where your rod tip is going, because you might not notice it when you're casting on location or whatever.
Yeah, good point. Well, and the toughest casting conditions is when, say, like I'm right-handed, so the wind is blowing right at my right shoulder. And that's when I got into trouble with these big flies, when I smacked myself in the back of the head because the wind's coming right at me. So you have to compensate for that. Like you said, you can either turn, 45 degrees and at least angle it and cast up higher here, so the fly is at least coming past your left ear.
Yeah.
Or turn your back to the water, like you said, and just cast that way.
Right. So we can't not talk about the double haul either. That's super important, really, in all aspects of casting, but especially in casting heavy flies, because you need a little bit more energy, definitely, to keep these flies in the air and help load your rod just a little bit more too. And the double haul is just something that you've got to work on all the time, master it. And maybe you never master it, but you always are progressing towards that. So if you're double haul, and especially the forward haul, I think a lot of people catch on to the haul when you're on your back cast, but it's that forward haul that a lot of people have trouble with. And I'll just mention it really quick. it's easy to say, but the application and the learning of it is a lot harder. But on your back cast, your hands go apart. You are pulling down. When the line is unrolling in the air, you're going to give that line back, and that loop that's going backward should take up that slack as you give it back. And on your forward cast, your hands are together, and as you're about to turn the rod over, you're pulling down and pulling the line down through the rod, and you're accelerating that line through the rod, then you stop. And so, yeah, sounds really easy.
So when you pull that on the forward, that just helps bend the rod deeper, right?
It does. It does. And yeah, if you bend the rod more, it's going to recover, from a deeper bend. Plus, as you're pulling down the line too, it just speeds it up. So,
in basic physics, it takes mass to move mass. And so these bigger flies obviously have more mass, so you need to help create more mass to move that weight.
Right. Speaking of mass, Chad, let's hit this really quick too. We mentioned this before, but a big weighted fly like this you're just not going to be able to cast it with a 5 weight. You could, but it would be so difficult. It just wouldn't be very fun. So buy a line that's actually a streamer line, because those typically have the more mass in the head. Not the skinny taper for a dry fly. Like if you have your dry fly line on, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, I'm going to tie on a streamer, and you start casting it, there's not enough mass in the front of that line to be able to throw that fly around. The fly is just going to go in the direction of your back cast. It's going to be a super challenge. So here's the lines that we've recommended before: is the Rio Outbound Short and the Orvis Bank Shot. There's other lines out there too, and we've got a Streamer Max from Airflow on the way. Chad's going to demo soon, probably, and we'll be able to check that one out too. But those lines have a lot of mass in the front that can help control these bigger flies. And when you have that, then you have a real tool to throw these flies with.
For sure. Well, yeah, you and I were up last week, ice off. We found a little bit of open water, and I did tie on our baby whitey just to my floating line, because where we were fishing was only 2 to 6 feet deep. That's as far out as the ice was. But that was a challenge, even to throw our baby whitey with my floating line. I mean, and the wind picked up in the afternoon, which created more challenges, but I could definitely tell the difference between the bank shot, which I'd been fishing for months now, and just that floating line.
Yeah. So here's something too, Chad, that people will run into is they buy the heavy line, but then they attach, because they don't know the difference, they put a 9-foot leader onto that, and it's not the right leader for these heavy flies. So they say, my fly's just going all over the place, and I have this awesome line, so-called. Well, what happens is when the heavy fly line unrolls, but then you have this really wispy, skinny leader, all of a sudden there's no mass in that leader, and the fly is just going all over the place. Mm-hmm. So to the end of your fly line, you want to have a pretty stout or stiff butt section to your leader. As the fly line unrolls, it can transfer its mass to, if the butt section of your leader has mass, it can just continue to roll and tow your fly in the direction that you want it to go. So our leader system is 50-pound mono that comes off of our fly line. And I like to use 20-pound tippet, or both Chad and I do, but it's just not very easy to knot 20-pound to 50-pound. So we put a 30-pound midsection coming off of our 50-pound, and then off the 30 is the 20-pound. And, you can make that anywhere from 4 to 5, and mine are usually 6 feet is what I like. A lot of people, leaders are a lot shorter. Is that kind of how do you like that, Chad?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes I've had mine out as long as 8 feet, but I don't know if that's ideal or not. That's just where it's ended up.
Well,
but no longer than that.
In the late fall, early fall, when the water is just gin clear, then I will put my leader out. And then we're talking about this particular reservoir that we fish a lot. So a lot of what we do is geared to catching fish in that reservoir, but it can carry over to a lot of different places. But make sure your leader is casting properly with the fly that you're throwing, and it attaches to your fly line and continues to unroll smoothly. If it doesn't, then there needs to be an adjustment somewhere in that leader.
Yeah, for sure. Let's keep talking about this, Jason. Let's get into equipment and setup, because having the right equipment is half the battle for sure.
Yeah.
So talk about, we just talked about tippet and leader. Let's talk about your line, because even though you typically fish an 8-weight rod with these big flies, you have a 9-weight line.
And
why?
Okay, yeah, sorry about that.
I mean, there's no rule that says you have an 8-weight rod, so you have to have an 8-weight line. There's definite advantages to sizing up. So,
and this is conditional probably a lot to what we were doing at that reservoir, because the water at that place had dropped down a lot. So you're walking down where normally the water would be close to the shore. It's dropped down like 50 feet. So you're clear out here, and now the bank is so steep behind you that it's hard. You can't cast a lot of line out on your back cast. And so with that heavier line, what that was doing was loading my rod faster without having a lot of line out past the rod tip, so that I could make quick casts and not keep smacking the cliffs behind me. And also the other feature that I liked about the heavier line weight is that it just controlled these bigger flies better, because it had more mass. So I could buy a 9-weight rod if I wanted to, or just overline, that they call it, my 8-weight, and just put more weight onto it.
Yeah, you need more mass, like we've already said. When you're fishing the dry flies and nymphs, you want tight loops, but we're talking about a wider loop casting stroke, right? So there's going to be more wind resistance, so that heavier line helps fight that and load your rod faster and get the fly out there.
Yeah, and then you just mentioned nymphs, Chad. Sometimes when you have like a double nymph rig, split shot, and an indicator, this Belgian cast is awesome too, because all of a sudden you just added a whole bunch of weight to the end of your leader, and there's a lot of mass there. And so that Belgian cast can really be helpful, or a constant tension cast can be really helpful for that too. Mm-hmm. Opening up your loop a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Now, rods. Talk about your rod, weight. You like the tip flex for streamers. Why?
I love to have the versatility of a really stiff rod, because when I need to punch the fly out there, because I've seen a fish and it's out there, it's like 100 feet, and I have to throw this heavy fly out there 100 feet. It has the capability to do that, and that's why I like it. I want to be able to. You can throw short with them; they're not ideal for that, but once you're pretty proficient at casting, you can throw short with a really stiff rod, or in the 30 to 40 range, or when necessary, at least you have that reserve power or the capability to make a super long cast. Hopefully it doesn't get stuck in your back or hit you on the head. Sometimes it does, but that's why I like those, Chad.
If you're going to make that mistake, at least do it in the winter when you're wearing a beanie.
or it's so cold where you can pull the hook and barb out and not feel it totally.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the first 2 times I did it was the same week. I was about ready to pull out a baseball helmet, start fishing with a helmet on. Those aren't, for those that have seen the head or maybe haven't touched our heads before, those aren't rubber heads. Those are hard molded plastic heads, and they flippin' hurt.
Yeah, here's one of the chub heads that we use at Strawberry. And I don't know if you can see that very well. There we go. How's that?
Yeah, for those listening, Jason's just holding up a chub head to the camera here. That looks so good.
Yeah, that's a fly that we would, or a head that we'd use, put on a fly for this reservoir that we go to where there's a lot of chubs, and it's a stout head, man. It really is hard. I can't break it or collapse it.
Well, we've never been able to shatter one. We've chucked them on concrete. We've smacked them against rocks casting. We've never had one shatter or break on us. Those are tough.
Yeah, you can mess up the paint job on one, but it's hard to wreck the actual frame itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jason, any other tips for guys wanting to cast big flies? Maybe haven't done it much.
It's always in the practicing of what you're trying to do to get better. So that's my first tip, is to get out and practice. So you can tie something heavy on to your line and find out where your whole casting system is, whether you need to make an adjustment with new line or you need to have a new rod to support that line. And then you can see with your leader too, like, how is this going to unwind? So I know with my heavy rod that I'm going to be able to throw little flies and stout flies with my 9-weight fly line. So, and that's just a tip. If you're going to throw really heavy flies, you'll be able to do both with a stout rod and a stout line. And then you're going to want to practice that Belgian cast and the double haul.
Well, so you brought up a good point earlier. I mean, if you don't have a buddy that you're fishing with that can sit there and watch you cast, like if you're practicing, then film yourself and watch it. Because there's times, like, obviously I'm still learning, and there's times I think I'm doing it right, and Jason will tell me a little too much bend in the wrist there, or elbows out a little too far. So it's helpful to either have somebody watch you or to watch yourself on film.
It really is helpful. And as you go along, whatever the fly in the loop is doing is going to tell you what you're doing in your cast. And then, as you get better, you'll be able to go, oh, I did this, I waited too long, my timing was off, there's slack all over the place, my haul's not strong enough. And I'm doing that every cast. And that might be just my nature, but I still put flies in my back, guys. Just ask Chad. I'm trying to go for the glory, the glory shot. Bam! Oh.
Well, if you get this constant tension cast down right, then you don't have to do the duck and chuck, which I still do sometimes. You can just sense that coming, and I just duck my head to avoid getting smacked.
Yeah. That's right, man. It's no fun, but it's part of the game.
Well, especially windy days. You're trying to get that out there, and you just go for the glory. But I still duck and chuck sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good technique, too. It might not look pretty, but, man, avoid being stuck at all costs.
Yeah, for sure. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening to today's episode. We invite you to stay safe on all of your fishing adventures and stick 'em solid. All right, friends. Thanks for listening to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, www.dropjawflies.com. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or our YouTube channel. Now get out there and hook a big one and stick 'em solid.